You're listening to the Racking Focus Podcast. Hey, welcome to the first ever episode of the Racking Focus Podcast. I'm Josiah Blizzard.
And I'm John Doyle, and we're here at the United Artists Theater in King of Prussia to see Avengers Endgame.
We are going to go into the theater, watch the movie, come right back out, sit in the car, and give you our honest feedback, our first thoughts of the movie, and the filmmaking behind the movie that brought it to life.
And after we've taken those moments in the car to capture that initial response, we're going to take a couple of days, go check out Reddit, talk to our friends, look at reviews online, and then come back with a new, fresh take, another focus on the movie, and talk about it again.
Ready?
Yeah, let's go in.
Cool, let's go. Okay.
All right, so that was Avengers Endgame. All right.
There's no way we're going to be able to talk about this entire thing in 20 minutes for this first segment because it's a 3-hour long film and there's just too much. I don't even remember half of it, I feel like, only because so much happened.
Yeah.
You on the same page?
I think, I think we have to talk in some broad strokes, and we probably have to talk about some things that were visually particularly interesting, or editing or story points that drove home really well.
Okay, so the biggest thing was this 3-act structure for me. Like, very clear. I mean, it's a 3-hour film, two and a half, maybe 2:45. But there's clearly Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. All the way, like you can just tell when you break into 2, when you break into 3, all the way down to an all is lost moment. At least for me, picking those things up, like it was very clear. I'd lean over to Steph and be like, "Time is it?" And she would tell me it's an hour in. I was like, "Okay, well, we just broke into 2." So they were completely just on target with timing and editing as far as the story act structure goes,
Yeah, they started for us with the character who's missing, right? So we start with Hawkeye, and we have this really, really interesting run down the hill with a shaky cam shot following him, completely out of character for what we see through the rest of the film, because everything's so polished, right? With the digital effects, and there's this crazy shaky cam structure.
I felt like I was thrust into a Jason Bourne film, or what's worse, maybe the Hunger Games, first movie. Which I hated because of that shaky cam.
Right.
But this felt completely in character as far as camera goes. It was completely smooth. Dolly shots, steady cam shots up until they disappeared. This is spoiler filled, just letting you know.
I guess we should say that
we should say that at the front. This is spoiler filled. If you're listening this far, it's your own fault.
Yeah, so what I thought was really interesting about that is that seldom in a Marvel film do we see cameras as part of character, right?
Yeah.
Like often the camera is simply existing to drive our adrenaline or to drive our emotional state. And here we have a character's emotional state being represented, not from POV, which is like the simple technique you might see in a simple, cheap, easy way, but in a real sort of rich, interesting movement. And it was really shaky. I mean, it was extraordinarily
really shaky. I was a little bit nervous after that shot I didn't know if they were going to go overboard with that later on, because the movie had I was nervous before coming to the theater because I wasn't sure what was going to happen, and if they're going to do the shaky camera effect up front, like it's not even crazy yet. Like what are they going to do later on? So that was really the only time I really noticed the camera.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the movie.
Yeah, I think, we saw a really standard sort of reverse shot structure and dialogue, and so much of the movie has digital effects. And so there's a limited number of sort of wild, thoughtful camera things you can do with a movie that is so digitally driven. And I don't mean to limit the digital idea, but you just have structures. There's things you
yeah.
you
Well,
need
you're
to do.
talking about a movie, right, that is so heavily relied on CGI that every single shot has to be smooth, planned out. There's no like, hey, cam up, I just want you to run with it. But you can do that in that first scene with Clint because there really was no CGI. You knew what happened based off of Infinity War when the family's there and you turn back around after a reverse shot and the family's gone. I mean, you know exactly what happened. So the fact that they didn't have to use any CGI really for those moments. I mean, you saw a pile of dust, maybe a little bit on the ground from the daughter shooting the arrows, but other than that, like they gave full control. And for the first few scenes, it felt like they were taking a very indie film approach to some of the storytelling. The lighting in Tony's ship was the only other moment that I noticed. They were very, very I don't know, lighting played a major role in that scene. Him getting back in the chair after he kind of fell asleep. And you're not sure if you saw something come on the horizon out there, right?
Right, and
you're not sure what it is. There's a little speck that maybe popped up.
Yeah, and there's something happening on a screen off to his right.
Yeah, right. And I'm like, is his face starting to glow a different color? And then all of a sudden, it's this big whoosh of stuff, and it's Captain Marvel, right? So that was really the only other time I noticed lighting being very, very, I don't know, distinctive. Everywhere else, it kind of just blended in for me.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say about the opening was they took their time with all of it, right? So we got a sense of time passage, even though that wasn't significant time in the story at that point. But we were reminded immediately of the intimacy of death, right? We've had, as an audience, a very long time to deal with the loss of these characters, and we were able to sort of reinvigorate that with the stuff with Clint. And then to have the idea of death, and Tony's death in particular, really laid out so firmly in that opening scene.
Yeah.
And that's a plant and payoff moment if ever there was one.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Big time. Big time. Yeah, you have, I mean, all we saw in Infinity War, right, was the Avengers losing members of their team. We never saw a family member being lost. Obviously, they're all family in the Avengers, right? But you see actual impact from somebody who was once in the Avengers, who's kind of taken a step back, is on house arrest, obviously, due to the ankle bracelet we saw in the beginning. But you see real impact, and that drives Clint to do his thing. And I feel like I have to talk about with you this very Ronin-style samurai moment.
Yeah.
Because I felt you get excited in the seat next to me when that happened. Tell me what was going through your head.
So I have to say that one of the things I thought, and I hesitate to use the word fan service, but one of the things that this film did in particular was it really took its time reaching back into comic book source material.
Right.
And, I've heard and read that Ronan was going to be in this, and it is a character that Clint takes on. And, the level of violence was extraordinary for a Disney Marvel film.
It was.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not necessarily graphic, and I'd say that was the distinct difference. So it isn't sort of Logan slicing open a face in the opening scene, but that level of violence is pretty high. And it's exciting to see that character, again, this thing they've done and over again, bringing these like really B or C characters from the comics out and giving them a position to play. Yeah. And I thought that was great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. I did not expect a Thanos head decapitation coming. Like, did not expect it. I guess when you're talking about a film that is 3 hours long and you have so much time to work with, you killed off half your characters in the previous film, you kind of have to start from ground zero. It's like they reintroduced a whole nother villain after Thanos died and brought Thanos to the future. You know what I mean? This whole thing is like 3 Back to the Future films merged into an action film. It had a bit of everything, if I'm really thinking about this movie.
Well, Well, certainly it was genre bending, right? So,
Yeah.
it plays the heist film concept plays all
Yeah.
through it. I mean, the music was so
Right.
heavily laden in like traditional heist music. The other thing I thought was really interesting was all of the sort of callbacks to previous uses of music. In particular, the sequence when we're seeing Star-Lord Quill sort of doing his dance, and we
Yep.
see the music, and it's without the credits, right? And
Right.
it's this vastly different visual representation. We're pulled way back from the action. We're seeing it really third person.
Yeah.
He does his little dance, and then of course we go the final step where the music is dropped down and we hear him sing.
Yeah.
And we get the gag, which is charming in its own right, and yet we also know what that looked like if you're not watching a movie.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Because you start Guardians of the Galaxy, you immediately like him. You don't feel like he's an idiot while he's doing that. You just maybe feel a little bit of arrogance, but you feel like he's a fun guy. But you step back. That's the power of editing, right? Is when you're on the other side of the camera on set. That must have been ridiculous to watch, and you probably felt ridiculous doing it. But once it's all cut together, music's in there, the editing's in there, sound effects and everything like that. Yeah, it's amazing, the magic of editing. There is so much. I don't even know where to go next because this movie had so much in it.
So why don't we take a moment or two and talk about sort of the surprises that took place in that first sequence. So we get, Thor appears in a drastically different. I mean, talk about leaning into the comedic Thor they're creating in Ragnarok. We get Taika Waititi back.
They brought fan favorites in for sure. I mean, the theater would erupt every time a new character came in. It was great to see Valkyrie back. It was great to see Korg and Meek. Is that his name?
Yeah, I think it's
his name.
Yeah,
Korg is the real hero, but
and Meek should sort of be dead. I'll be honest with you, but no, it's great to see him alive, eating whatever.
But yeah, going back to Thor and leaning into that really comedic. Cause I hated the first two Thor movies. I really did not like them. Thor he felt like he should be comedic, but they were kind of landing flat. Right. The jokes were landing flat, and then thank God Taika came in and kind of revamped him. But yeah, leaned hard into that, and you even got a Lebowski joke.
Right, absolutely. Well played.
Yes, and then you lean even harder into that entire Lebowski joke. Like, he's on Asgard, and I feel like he's actually in a bathrobe, and you might as well just say the rug tied the room together at that point. Please, just make the joke. Like, accidentally even. He hasn't seen the movie, but Thor was a welcome surprise in that very weird.
Yeah, you sort of. I feel like again the movie was breaking some barriers, and that's one where people are expecting something quite different, and he's the actor who's going to let that go, right? So he can let himself be completely out of whack as an actor and get away with it, still look great, right?
Yeah.
And I thought too that one of the things they did with him that was really interesting was they continually allowed him to find moments of strength, like you could see the strength present.
Yeah.
I thought that they did a wonderful job finding people's heart center for each character to give us time to embrace, right?
Yeah.
So from a storytelling standpoint, I felt like over and over again, we went right to the appropriate heart character. Mm-hmm. Now, as a writer, that's manipulation of us, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I thought it was spectacular. And the time with his mother was, in particular, both lovely and meaningful because we were with several of these historical characters who had time sensibility, right? They knew more. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. And you talk about it being manipulation, and that's really all film is, right? Alfred Hitchcock says drama's a life with the boring bits cut out. And that is manipulative to an extent, right? Just because that's not what life is in any way. People are running into the theater.
That's right. Yeah. Well, time it's probably late, right?
We have 10:56.
Yeah, so there you go. It's probably an 11 o'clock show they're going in
late.
for.
They are not getting
trouble.
popcorn.
No.
The biggest point that stuck out to me as far as like from a storytelling aspect, and we brought up a little bit of, Tony in the beginning, thinking of his imminent death on this ship that is going to run out of oxygen, and he just wants He just wants to make it back home and survive. But I think more than that, he wishes that he could make it right. Cut to 3 hours later to the end, where you have a spoiler self-sacrifice. He knew exactly what was happening when he snapped his fingers. He knew he would die. He knew there was no coming back from that. Strange even said, like, if I tell you what's going to happen, it won't happen. You tell Tony that you're the one who's going to sacrifice your life for the rest of us. That moment, there'd be a hesitation, and that hesitation, even a split second, could cause things to shift in Thanos' favor. But somebody, as a Christian who goes to church, who grew up in the church, thinking about the greatest story ever told, I'm not going to get religious on y'all, but you have a character of Jesus Christ, and over again in cinema, the stories that mean the most to me and that hit me the hardest are the stories of self-sacrifice. And those are the characters that you just deeply love and admire, and like, would I do that in that moment? So I think as far as Tony's entire story arc goes, from 2008 Iron Man came out, you see him as a arrogant, cocky, I am going to look out for myself and nobody else, to giving up his life for the entire planet. That is a massive, massive character arc.
And he certainly had time to think. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things that happened at that moment, it isn't rushed. You know, we
Right.
have a lot of rushing in the final battle sequence. And, you know, it's a CGI wonderland. And so you know, in some cases, there's no actors anywhere to be seen, right? It's just, you know, these tons of people making visuals, and then ADR voice, right, is happening in relationship. And then you get a moment where we literally have people in this environment taking a moment to think and make a choice.
Yeah.
And, you know, talk about a great way to bookend a series. So this is the end of your third phase, right?
Right.
And it is you end it by ending the phase one character that gave birth to the franchise, right? Like, this whole thing is built out of a successful experience with one Iron Man movie no one thought was going to be great.
Right.
And you end with a film where that's arced. And Captain America's arc is the same. And, you know, I was really feeling like he was going to be the one to go in this film.
Yeah.
And the choice they made with him is exactly the appropriate choice for the arc of that story.
100% agree. I even leaned over to Steph at one point after the entire time jump conversation began with them. And I said, he's going back to 1945 or whenever it was that he landed in the ice. Because he can't bump into himself. He can't alter time. He's gonna avoid himself. He's stuck in ice for 70 years. He doesn't have to worry about any of that. So like, I knew that I was like, he's got to go back. It doesn't make sense for him to do anything else. And I imagine probably in the writer's room that was a very clear decision that needed to be made. And then the passing the torch in multiple ways. It wasn't just from Captain America to Sam, where there was another passing the torch from, I can't remember.
Well, there was torch passing at the end, like over and over again, and we got to really see characters making transitions. And certainly that was the biggest, the most clear, you know. But we had the movement from who's ruling Asgard, right? That transition. At the end of the film,
you have the whole Valkyrie. Just keeping an eye on time.
Yeah, that's great. So, you know, I would also say, if we go back and we talk about some things just sort of in the center of the film, because I mean, it's just such a massive.
It's a jam-packed movie.
Film. When we look at the center of the film, we are back in people's lives again, right? Mm-hmm. All of that close-up work, often with moving cameras, like the Marvel movies like to do, like the Russos, they like that sort of almost artificial camera movement taking place, and yet we were intimate in with people, and as we kept getting surprise visits by people from somewhere along the three phases of filmmaking. Each of those people got their level of intimacy with us on the screen.
I agree with that. There's characters they brought back, like Tilda Swinton's character, that I just didn't expect them to bring back. Like, this movie is so packed. Like, I need to see it like 2 or 3 more times. I feel
absolutely.
like to really understand what I just watched. But center of the movie, as far as Act 2 goes, because we talked about Act 1 a bit, we talked about Act 3. There's just not enough time to talk about everything. Did you feel like at any point, Act 2 obviously is the point for me where things start to drag a little bit. Here, for me, it didn't. It was just a constant go, go, go. Even in those intimate moments like you're talking about where Tony meets his father and Cap almost bumps into his, was it Peggy? Maggie?
Yeah, Peggy.
Yeah, Peggy. So even in those moments, like I'm still worried. I'm like, is Howard going to discover is the suitcase going to open and the Tesseract's going to fall out and there's going to be issue but everything they did was so thoughtfully done. Down to like the last second of the film.
Yeah, and in that center section where they break the parties into other groupings, right? So we have some really interesting pairings, duos.
Yeah.
And we know some things that they don't know, right?
Yes.
So I feel like this film didn't shy away from saying you're going to sort of know some things that are going to happen.
Yeah, there's I don't remember what it's called. It's the irony, right, where the audience knows something that the characters don't, specifically with Clint and Nat, right?
Right.
Their journey when they said that they're going to find the Soul Stone, I was like, oh God, like everyone in the theater is dreading this moment.
Right.
We know what's going to happen.
Yep. Well, and there's conversations about the Scarlet Witch film, not Scarlet Witch film, there's Black Widow film, and so we're like, wait, hold on.
Yeah, what's
happening? And we know, we think we know an outcome, which we get flipped by. And that's one of those moments, too, where they're completely surrounded by CGI, right? Like, there's nothing in the world but two actors fighting in CGI.
Yeah.
And you just give that job to good actors.
Yeah.
And they carry the
They completely pull it off. I mean, you probably look at the behind the scenes; they're just on a whole bunch of blue screen. And even in those moments of them fighting with each other on who's going to jump off the cliff, it's still completely your camera's like we're like this close to them. It's intimate moments.
Yeah, those last moments where they're sort of holding on to each other, it was so good to see. Instead of a wide shot or an over-the-shoulder shot, we're getting like these intimate moments where we're watching actors be able to make choices.
Right.
And that's the difference between an emotionally resonant film and a movie that's not.
Exactly.
Right?
And even back to the whole self-sacrificing thing, like they were both just ready to die, not just for each other, but still for the stone, ultimately for the planet, and not just for the planet, but for the universe.
Right.
So, for me, I think characterizing this film as a self-sacrifice. Would you lay your life down for somebody else if you had to, if it came to that? So yeah, man, there's a whole lot to unpack.
So let's talk about the big reveal at the end, because that's worth at least addressing.
100%.
The sort of return moment, right? So like as a comic book fan, it was the splashiest page of any splash page I've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
Like that moment that was the big pulled back moment with all of the open circles.
Yeah.
And we know the language of this world really well. Like we understand, if you've watched these films and they expect you to, what's happening in those moments. And each of those reveals, as you said, got applause from the audience and response. And wisely, as filmmakers, they gave time. Like they know that those things are going to have to take place. But I guess what I want to ask about is the battle between the three Avengers, right?
Yeah, the main three, and
Thor, and Captain America and Iron Man. Sort of, what were your thoughts during that?
I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, because at any moment he's going to slice one of them in half. I mean, we saw Thanos' head come off in the first act. It was like they could do anything at this point. And at one point I did think that Cap was going to get it.
He gets sliced a little bit or something. There's some contact that's made.
Yeah, right. I think he gets his leg or something, but then he breaks his shield in half, which is impressive considering it's vibranium. I don't know what his sword is made of, but it's something stronger than vibranium, right? Or maybe it is vibranium, look. But I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, not sure what was happening, and I think the biggest moment there, like that caught me by surprise, was Cap being able to hold the hammer.
Right.
That was really, I have no words for that. Like,
right.
It was incredible.
And as a comic book fan, that's a payoff, right?
Right.
So, like, we know that's the case. Like, as a comic book fan, I know that he's one of the hammer holders.
Okay.
But hammer using is different than hammer holding.
Yeah.
And that stuff was extraordinary.
Right.
Thor's gets his joke line in too. Like, again, just masterfully dropping the joke in. I knew it. Like, that moment is so good.
And their jokes don't undercut the tension or action. Like, they do a really good job of placing the joke in there and the actor actually delivering the line in the appropriate amount of time without it, and it's the right joke. It's not something over the top. Whereas I feel like the last couple, and we're going to dive into Star Wars for just a quick second, I feel like the last couple Star Wars films have, as much as I've liked them, the humor that they've used has really kind of undercut some of the action and tension for me. So the Russos, I don't know if they wrote it as well. I'm sure they were in on the screenwriting process, but down to their directing and editing decisions, the jokes never landed in a weird way or in a way that undercut any sort of tension or action.
Yeah, I think so many of them are character driven too. So we know these people and we know what they say, right?
Right.
So when Rocket says something that's wildly inappropriate, it's fine because it doesn't derail the story because it's part of the...
It's his character.
Yeah, it's his character.
It's what he would say in that moment.
And the way these people have been interacting for us. Like, one of the benefits of the film, right, is they have all of these other movies to rely on for character development.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, there was, originally this was supposed to be a 2-part experience, right? So there was a Gauntlet and Endgame. And in fact, it's really 2 separate movies. And I don't know if I'd want to watch them as one 5.5-hour block. 5.5 hours is a lot of time anyway. Yeah. But in a binging culture, it's not. And I'm not sure I want to do that. I think what I might want to do is watch them separately and have that gap time between so that the movies can resonate and do the work that they're designed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Overall, what did you think of the film if you were to give it a rating right now, 1 out of 10, 10 being the best movie you've ever seen in your entire life and 1 being like The Room?
So it's almost impossible to answer that question.
Yeah.
And this is the first time we're doing it, so this is an experience. I would say I'm going to give this film an 8, all right? But I want to say second to that is there's things that I have concerns about in the movie that we haven't talked about because we don't have time.
Yeah.
I give it a 10 as an experience of going to the cinema.
As far as a superhero movie goes, what would you give it?
Yeah, it's like as good as you get as a superhero movie. I mean, I think it's extraordinary.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat there. Like, as far as a movie goes, especially as an action film, just breaking it down as an action film, it's incredible. Start to finish. And we've had, like you said, 10 years in past movies to get to know these characters. So there's way less of exposition and character development that has to happen that you can jump right in. I shouldn't snap as much. That might be jarring.
The theater just emptied out.
Yeah, right.
People are now able to get seats again.
But yeah, I'd give it an 8 out of 10 as well as far as the movie goes. And I mean, this is completely up there as far as superhero movies go. I mean, I heard one guy, he was saying it beat The Dark Knight for him, and The Dark Knight's pretty much as perfect of a superhero film as you can get. Yeah,
The Dark Knight is a great film in a lot of ways, and so on my regular rating it might be higher, but this trumps it as a superhero film. It really does. I mean, it hits every single beat that it needs to.
Right.
And I think what we can do is when we come back in a couple of days, right, we're going to talk again, we're going to go look around the world, and we're going to do the second half of this sort of podcast concept that we have. And I think we should take some time and talk about some of those things that didn't land as strongly as this emotional response is.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard enough weeping around me, throughout the film, and that is what this part of our conversation's about.
Yeah.
So let's call this good. We'll be back for you in moments and a snap of a finger, but we will be back.
All right, welcome back to the Wrapping Focus podcast, the second half of our show. John's going to take it away and explain how it all works.
So here's what we're doing. We sat in a car and we talked about the immediate response that we had to the film, and now we've had some time to digest. I listened to some podcasts, read some articles, talked to friends, looked around Twitter. Josiah did much of the same, but he also went back and saw the movie for a second time. So we all have some different perspectives now. We have some different thoughts and some things we'd like to address from stuff we've heard around the internet. And so that's what we're going to do for the next 30 minutes or so.
I couldn't help myself. I had to go back and see it, especially when my brother asked. I was very interested to see the difference between the theater's reactions being opening night versus 2 days later. And the difference in the enjoyment of the film was slight. My audience, the audience reaction for the second time was not nearly as excited. You have somebody, Cap picks up the hammer in the movie, and our first viewing, the entire place erupts, right? In our theater on Thursday night. Saturday, it's like dead quiet when he picks this thing up, and I'm like, why is nobody reacting to this incredible moment? And I think when T'Challa came out, that was the most excited the theater got, which rightfully so, because everybody's starting to show up. Hey, Cap on your left, right? Like that moment there was really awesome, and that was probably the biggest moment for everybody on Saturday. But
you went to a matinee too.
I did go to a matinee. It was 1:00 in the afternoon, so I think we saw it one of the first viewings on Thursday night.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a huge difference there. But overall, it didn't necessarily affect my overall enjoyment of the film. It was just way more exciting. We talk about an experience of going to this movie. It is an experience, and not just a one time we're going to go see John Wick 2 in theaters, and it's not the same. This is a culmination of 21 films over 11 years. It's like going to Disney World, but sitting in a theater. It's so exciting, but less exciting the second time seeing it with a group of people. So
that's pretty interesting. I'm not surprised, because the movie is. I've had a couple of people. I have a friend from Wyoming who called me who said, "Should I go see it?" He said, "I haven't seen any of the other Marvel films." And I was like, "Well, you at least need to watch like these 5, or you're just not going to get it." I said, "You can enjoy the roller coaster of it, but it'll be meaningless and without some of those touchstones."
Right.
And the thing about the film is the touchstones come from movies that are less popular. So like The Dark World and Ultron are really crucial to this film.
Right.
And there's people who have watched The Dark World once or not at all, and Ultron, which is a difficult film in some ways, like maybe once. And so those things aren't resonant in the same way, Winter Soldier or First Cap or First Iron Man or whatever.
Right. Well, that was something that I think both of us listened to, the Storm of Spoilers podcast for a little bit, and they were talking about does this movie stand alone as a movie, or does it work by itself, or even just does it work as a sequel to Infinity War? And the movie does, but if you don't see any of the other films, this is really, like I said, a culmination of 21 other movies.
Right.
And it is the ending to this whole journey that Iron Man's gone on, that Cap's gone on, the Avengers have gone on. And so if you haven't seen those films, this whole movie, you might as well not even watch it, because it really does, and we talked about this a little bit in the first session, was it manipulates you into, you're nostalgic for a bit, you're going back in time, and they are manipulating you with that nostalgia, and the emotional response you have towards the film is like heavily, like, we want you to feel a lot of different things in this movie, and so the emotion that they were trying to evoke is only, it's you need to watch the other films for it to work, and it does not work otherwise.
Yeah, that hammer moment is from Ultron, right? Like the thing it's calling back to is from that other film, and if you don't know that and you haven't read the comics, understanding why no one else can pick that thing up is really important. And seeing, like, for me as a comic viewer, as I said, like seeing the Lightning join in as well, that's a whole different ballgame, because it's about a different kind of honor. And that's fantastic. But literally the picking up of it is part of that Ultron storyline, and we see that come to fruition. But someone else just gets the excitement of the battle scene instead of the resonance of Cap's
There's a lot
honor.
of callbacks that happen, down to dialogue.
Oh, absolutely.
Something I picked up this second watch through was, Cap and Bucky say goodbye at the end before he goes to return the Infinity Stones, and I am convinced 100% Bucky knew exactly what he was going to do. I was questioning it the first time. This second time watching it, Bucky literally says, "I'm gonna miss you," knowing that he's gonna be gone for like 10 seconds of Bucky's life. but also knowing that he's going to miss Cap and the life he's going to have without Bucky being there. The life they probably both should have had together. They're both out of time people, right? And so Cap being able to go back in time, have a life with Peggy, Bucky's missing all of that. And I think that's really what he's saying. I'm going to miss you, even though he knows in 10 seconds he's going to see him again. Yeah, like that really resonated with me this time through. And I know there's been a lot of controversy over how they finished Cap's story.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard a couple folks talk, and I certainly saw some stuff on Twitter about the fact that that Cap story isn't fitting with him. It's not right. It's not part of his character, and that I so disagree with the idea of a man of honor and self-sacrifice not having the opportunity to live out his life. That to me is really, really crucial, and he did the job. Like he stood up alone. He was there in those last moments, broken shield and all. And the story, his first story, the first Avengers story, is about that love affair being broken.
Right.
And a promise being made about seeing her later. And the fact that he keeps that promise as well as the promise to his people means it's in character.
Yeah.
And it's someone who, and if you really watch the moments with Cap and Agent Carter in her dying moments, there's some things there that seed this too.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful. And for people who care about the characters as opposed to care simply about plot structure or design, you really are allowed to have that emotional payoff.
That's the difference. I'm one of the people that kind of just buys into what are they going to do with the characters, and whatever they do with the characters, I'm probably going to be on board with, unless they actually take it into left field and it's super weird and absolutely not fitting. But going into this movie, I'm like, I can't write a movie better than this. Like, there's no way I can bring all these characters to the end of their journey like the Russos did, and have it actually be compelling. And so knowing that going forward, I'm humbling myself, obviously, because there's no way I can do it, and they can, and they did it well, I think. And they seeded little things along the way that actually told you what was going to happen at the end of this movie. And I'm actually going to jump to the end of the agenda list that we have here.
Yeah, great. That's cool.
Because it just seems like the right transition. You have the big three, Cap, Iron Man, Thor, all going back in time to their past, to somewhat a pivotal moment for them. Cap's was a little bit less pivotal. Obviously, you have Tony bumping into his father, and he knew his father was gonna be there most likely. And you have Thor going back to where the day his mother died. Those two things, massive. I don't think Cap knew he was gonna see Peggy from the window. I didn't think he didn't think he was gonna be creeping through the window like he was doing.
Right.
But it was in that moment, I think, for Cap that he knew, I'm in 1970 right now. I can be in 1945 with her at the end of this, as long as I take 4 Pym particles. And he takes a whole handful. I don't know why he didn't just take all of them. Maybe he was leaving it for Hank and just being a nice guy. But he takes a whole bunch, and I think at that point he knew, like, I'm going to go back to 1945 and spend the rest of my life with her. Time travel works. 100%. I don't have to be the soldier out of time anymore. Same with Tony. We've seen Tony this entire journey kind of go from a very narcissistic, self-centered, arrogant playboy, billionaire philanthropist, as he's called himself, to the most selfless human probably in the universe. And we've talked about a little bit about the other Avengers being super selfless as well. Black Widow jumping off the cliff, even Clint jumping off the cliff, both self-sacrificing. But Tony knowing the full extent. But even in this film, in Endgame, he goes from not wanting to sacrifice anything that he has. He's probably one of the few people who have come out of the snapping being happier than he was before it happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
He has a family. He has a kid. He's happy. Doesn't want to risk any of it. And it's in the moment in the elevator with his dad, Howard, where Howard says, "I hope I have a girl," and he says, Why would you want a girl over a boy? And he says, it's less likely for them to turn out just like me. Tony replies, would that be so bad? Howard says, the greater good rarely outweighs my self-interest.
Yeah.
That line there is what propelled Tony to finish the job and to become the one chance for all of the universe to exist, because of this self-sacrifice, because of the greater good at that moment outweighed Tony's self-interest. And that was a huge moment. That was the pivotal moment for Tony, I think, in that entire movie. Would he have done it if they didn't go back to 1970? I don't know. And it was honoring of his father, because he followed the path that his father wanted him to take. So,
yeah, you know, when we look at the relationship with Tony and his father, and with Thor and his mother, and the third relationship that we encounter, which is Cap and Peggy, each of those is the relationship that makes the difference for them. And plotting out to make those the important drops really works. One's a setup, right? But it also is a meaningful place for Cap to be, for him to see the relationship that's unresolved for him. In the way that the relationship with Thor's mother is an unresolved relationship in that story. He gets resolution with Odin. I mean, Ragnarok really lets that happen. But he never gets it with his mom. But he never gets it with his mom, and so he gets it there. And no matter what we think about Jane, and some thought about that being an important relationship, it's not as important as this movie talking about family, which is core to the entire Marvel universe. It's core to Guardians of the Galaxy most openly. But all these pieces talk about the idea of family. And so the idea of your family, as opposed to the human family, the greater good over the individual good, he deliberately makes sure that his child is not snapped out of existence. And then has to make the decision to abandon her. In that moment, which is without dialogue, right? It's a single finger from Doctor Strange. So powerful. And, you know, again, I'll say this. That's why you get the kind of actors that you get for this piece. Someone who can put their finger up and make a look. And you understand
exactly what it means. And you understand 100%. But also the gravity of what he's saying.
Exactly.
I'm not sure if Tony knew, like, the one, if that means that, like, they won, or if Tony knew exactly.
I think Tony knows what he has to do with it, that it's him. Tony knows it's him, I think, at that moment. And I think that Doctor Strange knows he's just told Tony he has to do a thing that's going to kill him. And I think there's this moment of such, like, when you tell someone, listen, it's time for you to do a thing. And I set this up.
Well, yes, and he did, because he said, you need to Thanos, save Tony, I'll give you the time stone.
That's exactly
right. He knew Tony needed to live. And this, I'm sure, is talked about in dozens of other podcasts and other YouTube discussions, right? But I think, without talking about the plot, or without talking about does the story work, because that's not something necessarily we want to do, talking about the filmmaking behind why those choices were made, that I think I love seeing little seeds planted in the beginning of the movie and having that then come, because we're not, I think, as filmmakers, we understand when those seeds are dropped, and we can notice them a little bit more after the movie's done and we've seen the resolution. Whereas I think some normal people, I don't know if Steph would have picked up on that. I don't know if Lisa would have picked up on that. Like, our other family that we saw it with, I don't know if they would have picked up on that sort of thing. But for me, even seeing, multiple times, Tony was like, Cap, you need to get a life. I think Cap said to Black Widow, to Natch, he said, it's time to move on. It's time to move on. It's time to get a life and move on. And she said to him, only if you get one first. Twice, people told them in this movie for him to get a life. And so it took all of this for him to actually go back to 1945 and get a life. And Cap, I don't remember where I heard this. It was somewhere. Maybe it was Storm of Spoilers, saying it took, Cap and Tony kind of switched places, and Cap taught Tony how to be self-sacrificing, and Tony taught Cap how to get a life, which I thought was a really interesting thought from wherever I heard it. I don't remember where it was.
I think it is Storm of Spoilers. And their relationship is so interesting and so complex and challenged, right? And, I mean, Robert Downey Jr. is just blowing the walls off with his acting, right?
Yeah.
The scope of what he did in this is really
Yeah.
amazing. And for a guy who's been doing this for so long, he's a really solid actor, and it makes a big difference in the way that piece looks. But when Cap has to go get a life, one of the other things I just want to say about that before we move on is that we allow our members of our military to get an honorable discharge and go and live a life, and then we call them veterans and we honor them forever. And in a way, Cap's a vet of the greatest war humanities has, and he deserves the opportunity to experience love and to pay that promise off. And the other thing too, and for me this was a really powerful, moving moment, was the exchange of the shield. That we need Cap at the end in order to create the new Captain America. That's a thing we can't lose. We have a new Iron Man potentially. We're Iron People. Like there's a whole lot of opportunity for that. We have 3 people in that sort of world. But Captain America's story could drop. Right. And there is, first choice is Bucky, best friend, right?
Yeah, right.
But it's not. He makes the much more interesting choice, the choice to go with the guy who's his heart in a lot of ways, who had his back, like who's on the left, like that call out.
Yeah.
And in the end, who's the black character. The movie is saying, look, the world is changing, and we're not going to ignore this B player in the story. We're going to allow him to be an A player. Everyone's talking about Sebastian Stan and that he should be, there should be a movie for, his character, that the Winter Soldier should have his own story. But no one's saying that about the Falcon. And I'm going to be honest with you, Falcon was my favorite character of the Cap stuff when I was a kid. So I just to be completely honest, so I own all but 15 of the original 300 Avengers run.
Good Lord.
I own almost all of the Captain America run. I'm a huge fan of those figures, and the Falcon was one of my favorites.
Right.
And so that transition in the comics when he moves to Cap is cool, but this choice was so subtle and so it's the weight of it landed, and we knew that the transition wasn't about entitlement, it was about responsibility, and that's what Stan Lee wanted in the beginning. That's what comics are about. It's so powerful for me.
I think that's true, and I believe I heard we're getting a Bucky and Sam spin-off.
I think there's a Disney series.
Yeah,
that's one of the Disney spin-offs that they're talking about, and then now we know where it's coming from, right? We know that those
it makes sense now, and I think I think the choice to we've seen like you said, the world is changing. We're seeing Black Panther get his own movie for the fact that we have a first blockbuster black superhero to resonate with the black community, and then to bring Sam back in as Captain America. You are Captain America. You are representing America. So now we have 2 major black superheroes leading the charge for the black community, and then we have this major women's fight, which I so much loved when they all backed up Captain Marvel, who, let's talk about, doesn't necessarily need backup. I feel like she could just blow through there. But I loved all the women coming to her defense. Really was kind of metaphorical for what needs to happen in our society. And with the Me Too movement that happened, without getting too political, that really represented what all women need to do for each other.
And people went after the Captain Marvel movie, like there was such a blowback at the very beginning before it came out, and so having women stand up for that, I heard some really negative comments about that moment, that it was exploitive and it was cheap, and and I understand those, and certainly I'm a man, so I don't have a full comprehension of that, but I ended up, after hearing that, talking to some women who, many of them were quite moved by that, because for women who understand the industry or who are part of those movements, they have a measure of empowerment. But for folks who aren't, who don't understand that, for young people who I work with when I'm teaching, for them, that was an opportunity to see themselves empowered. And so there's always 2 sides to these issues, and it may have been a fan service choice. But sometimes fan service is about empowering an audience to be changed, to grow, and that moment was powerful for me. And my wife, she cheered after the film when I talked to her the next day, because we were working late that night. She, her words were all about that sequence. And yet I know some feminist critics have been very negative towards it. And for me, the most important thing is, woke or not, that conversation needs to be about what it means to us as humans, as opposed to what it means to some external political vision.
Yeah, I think asking the question, will this empower people? And will this make people more confident or a better person? If the answer is yes, then I think including that in the film is probably a good decision. I think like you said, I think the more there's more people who were affected positively by that than negatively, and there's always going to be haters on every side of the thing. Down to, why did Cap go back to 1945? Right. That's so wrong. And in reality, I think that's wrong. I think it's completely right for him to go back. So anyway, that's just a few thoughts on that, right?
So let's look. You have this really great secondary quote, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to read it. The measure of a hero is succeeding at who they are. Now go be a man who you were meant to be. And that's Thor's mom to him. And then Thor calls out the hammer, right? He gets his hammer back at that moment. After acquiring it, he states, "I'm still worthy." What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, man, I think the Avengers in general often feel like, am I worthy to do this job? Am I qualified? I think as humans, we often feel I'm not qualified to do this job. But there's other people who believe in us, who call us into what we're supposed to be doing, encouraging us, pushing us towards the finish line. And that's what his mother did, and that was one of the best scenes, I think, in the entire movie. And that was the other part. That was a pivotal moment for Thor. We talked about Cap and Tony's pivotal moments in the film. For Thor, getting that resolution and having his mother tell him not necessarily who he is, but who he can be, just by simply believing in himself and just being who he's meant to be. Just let it happen. Like, stop trying to be someone that you think you're supposed to be. Just be you and do what you're meant to do. He knew and we've kind of dealt with this in Thor Ragnarok. He kind of had a little crisis, right? Of, am I the god of hammers or am I the god of thunder? Odin tells him, now you're the god of hammers or the god of thunder. And clearly he's the god of thunder, hence that whole lightning, and that's who he is. He's not defined by his hammer, and in the same way, he's not defined by his failure against Thanos. He's defined by what's still to come in his life, and the fact that he was able to grab that hammer and get it back was I loved that entire scene, and it was pivotal for him. Moving forward throughout the movie.
Yeah, and for Thor as a character, I find it really interesting. We have one okay movie and one really problematic film. Right? The Dark World is hugely problematic. I mean, in almost every way.
Yeah.
And then this sort of charming, entertaining Taika Waititi, Ragnarok film that is dealing with the end of the world, and yet this sort of upbeat, funny, entertaining thing.
Right.
And he in fact has traveled as a character the same journey we're watching him.
Yeah.
That idea of quote unquote fat Thor is the Thor that doesn't work. It's the Thor that doesn't care about who he is. Yeah. It's the Thor of the Dark World. This broken, weird, not very successful.
We just
story.
See a very physical version of that.
We just see it physicalized in this moment. And then, in addition, he's also the one who has made these giant life-killing mistakes.
Right.
In Ultron, we have a big disaster. What he does with Thanos and chopping off his head, or not chopping off his head. All of those things are these weights that Thor carries. Yeah. And we as humans, it's great to see the God character in the story.
Yeah.
Having to say, I'm not worthy of what? What? Being a god? No, I'm not worthy of what the world expects of me.
Right.
Which means these stories are talking about something far bigger than this simple plot line, and Thor gets to give us that moment. And I think that your quote is really wonderful. It's just a beautifully written piece of dialogue.
The whole scene was beautiful. Yeah,
when you just choose the right actors and you put them out there,
and
it really does work. And I think that's really amazing. One thing we haven't talked about. How are we doing on time?
We have about 1 minute and 40 seconds.
All right, so here's what we're gonna do. So there's some other stuff we want to talk about, and I'm going to go to main camera. There's some other stuff we want to talk about. We're going to break, though, because our cameras are going to run out of recording time, and that's just part of what we're doing with this beginning of our process. We should talk about cameos.
Cameos, yes. Well, let's start with cameos, because that's really brief. we see.
Oh, we're on. Wait, that's right.
Yeah,
okay.
We're rolling. We're good.
Okay, good.
We're good. So we see, I believe the first cameo we see is Joe Russo.
Right.
The director sitting next to, in Cap's kind of support group. And I think I leaned over to you in the theater and was like, is that a Russo brother?
Yeah.
I couldn't remember. I think it is. And it is him. And I'm not sure. I think you're aware. On the other side of the circle
is Jim Starlin, right?
Yeah, and I didn't know who that was in the movie, but I think that's a really nice. And I don't think a lot of people are going to know who this is. So tell me about Jim Starlin. Who he is.
So this is one of those things that Starlin's the guy who sort of creates this whole storyline. Now the characters are firmly Jack Kirby and Stan Lee's, right? And the Russos are firmly crafting them into this film thing by driving this sort of Cap Avengers path that they've been on, along with the other folks who've been involved. But Starlin is the Infinity Gauntlet guy. He's the Adam Warlock guy, who we haven't seen yet, but I think we're going to.
Yeah.
He's the Drax character maker. Adam Warlock's comic is the comic where where Thanos is crucial and everything sort of begins to blossom from there. And so having him, and he was recognized at the end of the film in a credit as well, which was lovely. Kirby and Lee get the big credit, and then he gets that small credit. But getting him on the screen was just really charming, because as a comic book person, those people matter because their vision crafted a lot of my life. Like Captain America crafts a lot of the way I see the world. Adam Warlock's those stories craft a lot of the way I see the world, which may be weird, but it's what it is. And Starlin created that, right?
Yeah.
And so honoring him really matters, and we don't often see that in comics. The Stan Lee cameos have become something other than honoring Stan. They've become this crucial component.
Yeah.
So getting Russo and Starlin in there to me was just it was really rewarding, and the fact that they're in the support group about the lost people, when they are the people who are responsible for that happening and the concept, and the fact that group that they're in is the group essentially that Sam was running, right when sort of things start. There's so much going on there that wraps around us, who are all like, we needed that support group.
Yeah, exactly. And what's funny, we talked about this earlier in this in the podcast, but Cap telling them to move on. You have to move on. You have to get a life. You have to get over it, or if not, why didn't Thanos just wipe us all out? And so for Cap to take his own advice at the end of the movie was very full circle there. Let's talk about Stan Lee cameo. Just for a brief moment, we saw 1970s Stan Lee, hippie Stan Lee, I think, in his car. I thought I heard somewhere online that he dropped an F-bomb in that section, but I don't remember hearing it.
And I don't remember hearing it either.
Yeah.
And it was Make Love Not War, I think.
That's what I think he said,
Yeah,
so I don't know why I heard.
It was strange.
Yeah.
And, those cameos were shot so near his death.
Right.
And the one in Captain Marvel, they ended up using a different take from Kevin Smith from when he really did the line back in Mallrats. It was tough, and so it was weird. I felt like visually that was a very jarring moment for me, as charming and wonderful as it was to see Stan Lee.
I was really hoping for a more honoring of Stan Lee in the film, and going back to what you said about honoring Russo and Starlin in that support group, and how the cameos from Stan Lee, they've been going on for so long that they've just become something you look for. Where is he? Where is he in this movie? He's the bus driver. He's he's charming some lady in the club, or he's a DJ in the club. He's cutting Thor's hair, right? They just become what they are until his death recently, and they've become very honoring of who Stan Lee was. And my favorite cameo of all time, and I heard this again in Storm of Spoilers, I think, was the Spider-Verse a cameo from him was so touching. Oh my gosh, I can't believe he's talking about the Spidey suit and how it always fits.
Right.
It always fits, and that he knew Spider-Man was a friend of his. Man, that was touching, and I wish that maybe that one was the final cameo from him, because this one in Endgame felt a little bit weird, but what else are you gonna do with it?
It's more important for him to be there for that than for it to be perfect at this point.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit. About Natasha and what happens with her. There's been some controversy around that, and we talked in the car about those moments and how we thought some of that was really moving for us. Let's take a moment and talk about Natasha missing from the final battle. How's that feel to you?
I might have a different perspective because I'm a guy.
Yeah, sure.
But I didn't feel like I missed anything. Like, I didn't feel like she was missing. I think she was represented by all the other women in the film coming together in that final fight. And she essentially passed the torch to Clint. Clint was out for so long. Like, we've only seen Hawkeye for like a very small portion of the cinematic universe, I feel like. Yeah. And we've seen a lot of Scarlett Johansson's character. So for her to sacrifice herself, I honestly think that she did more than underneath Tony, she made the next biggest sacrifice. Right. I think that, yeah, sure, Cap did a lot. All the other people did an amazing job, protecting the world, but she knew she had to die, and she did it. Didn't hesitation. She said, whatever it takes. And I think Cap said that at one point as well. Whatever it takes. Whatever it took was her death. So I don't have an issue with her not being in the end. I know that it felt weird for maybe her not to be there because she's been in the whole thing, and we're getting rid of the woman, right. Which, yeah, maybe she should have been there in some way, shape, or form. But I think the sacrifice she made it okay that she wasn't there. The bigger issue for me is that why did neither of them know what they were going to do?
No, and that's really
because right. Nebula says it to Rhodey. They just have to not fall out, and that was a clear line of like, if they start hating each other within the next 20 minutes, then we have a real big issue here. I don't think Rhodey picked up on that line. I don't think he understood what they were going to do. But what did you think about her not being in the end?
Yeah, so she has been a part of the story with Iron Man. Like, she's back at the formation of the Avengers, the driving force of that. And, we're going to have this prequel movie with her, this flashback movie with her. And maybe that'll do some of the work we need to fill in this moment. That to me is that film's become really important now. Right. I missed the circle from the first Avengers at the end. Right.
Yeah.
I missed that moment. And it's a splash page moment, but I missed that in a way at the end. But I understand why they had to do it. And there's this bizarre like production problem, right? She doesn't want to do any more movies.
Right.
She needs to be locked out in a way, and they just found a route to do that. The bigger issue for me is the relationship with Hawkeye versus the relationship with the Hulk, and the fact that Hulk relationship seemed to all but disappear in this film. And from a writing perspective, that was really strange.
The Hulk and Nat's relationship.
The Hulk and Nat relationship, which seemed, the shippers ship those two. There's reasons. They really did push their connection. The romance there was strong. Now, certainly, maybe Ragnarok makes the difference. Maybe Professor Hulk makes the difference, but still that emotional state seemed really pulled back from where it could have been. Throwing a bench is one thing, but that's not, to me, the move that Bruce Banner makes about this woman who he cares about.
Yeah.
And Hawkeye gets that emotional beat, which is fine. He has it. But he also has that family, too. He's made a choice about his love and all of that. And so there's something about that felt wonky, like weird. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they didn't know what they were doing there was strange as well.
I think part of that emotional response between Hawkeye losing Nat versus the Hulk losing Nat, we've seen the relationship, like you were saying, build between Black Widow and Hulk throughout the last couple films. Whereas I think that Hawkeye and Nat's relationship was already implied that there was one there.
And long term, right?
Long term, Budapest.
Yep.
Which I don't know what happened in Budapest, and maybe you do in the comics, or there's something there. I don't know. I have no idea. And because we didn't see that relationship, there's a disconnect for the audience of, well, it should be Hulk, and Hulk freaking out a little bit more over losing that than Hawkeye having that to say goodbye in the way he did. But I think that's only because we've missed out on Hawkeye and Nat's relationship. I think they're closer than Nat and Hulk are.
And maybe something happens in this prequel movie that gives us that material that we can use then to back reference, which they've done over and over again.
If I had to guess where they were going to go with a prequel film for Natasha, it's gotta be something with Hawkeye, because if it's not, then she's just solo on her own, and I don't want to say she's not strong enough to carry the movie on her own, because she's done that with multiple other films that she's been in, right? But not Marvel films, but just Scarlett Johansson's a great actress. She can do it by herself, but I think she is a character. Black Widow's a character that I feel like is stronger when she's with somebody like the Hulk or like Hawkeye. Not saying that she needs them, but that there's an added bonus to having, there's a personality trait that comes out in her when she's with somebody else that I want to watch her a little bit more when she's with somebody, rather than just being a grumpy solo Black Widow going to assassinate a bunch of people.
Yeah, and those all of these movies need that second person in the film to let the first character have a stone to sharpen against, or whatever.
It's the Rhodey, it's the Pepper Potts, it's Bucky, it's Loki. There's always a secondary character. If I had to pick a secondary character for Black Widow for a prequel film, it's going to be Hawkeye.
Yeah.
I just don't know who else it would be.
And they couldn't send the Hulk off to that mountain, because the Hulk would. She could not have beaten him. It had to be two regular human folk.
Yeah.
And for me, the other thing about that choice that's so interesting is, and I don't want to hammer on too much because we did talk about it before, but they're two humans making a decision. Mm-hmm. They don't have superpowers. Mm-hmm. Neither of them does. They're just people deciding to give their life to save the world. Cap has extraordinary strength.
Yeah.
Those two just have skill. They just have skill, human crafted skill.
They know when they hit the ground, there's no coming back from that. Iron Man falls, sure he's human, but he's in a suit. Cap falls, he's superhuman.
Well, and we see those things late in the movie, but we don't. We've seen Hulk fall. We've seen all of that.
Right.
And with those, the stakes are so high. Yeah. I just think some people couldn't connect sufficiently with Hawkeye's character.
Yeah.
And I think that became problematic.
Yeah, for sure.
Again, my comic background gives me some into him. Why don't you talk a little bit about this timeline thing? Because this is a filmmaking thing, right?
Yeah.
The timeline issue is about what time travel means, and what does it mean in the Marvel universe?
This is actually a really incredibly confusing timeline, but it's very simple. Within the first hour, I think in the first act, they completely laid the ground rules for what timeline is, and it is not Back to the Future, and I think it's also not Terminator.
Right? I think for sure.
Because the past will affect your future. This is like your past does not change your future. It just takes you out of time, and there's some kind of parallel. You're riding along next to the timeline you originally belong. It feels very convoluted and complex. But what it opens up, I think, is a lot of possibilities for spin-offs, and like there is a timeline somewhere where Loki's not dead,
right? Because
he took the Tesseract in 2012 or 13 or 11, whatever. Somewhere in that era, he takes the Tesseract, and so there's a timeline where Loki's not dead.
And so we have a Disney series of Loki.
Yeah, exactly.
Problem
solved.
There
might be multiple timelines, and the question that I've been seeing is, and especially on Reddit, was. So Cap is he's on this timeline, and he goes back in time to return the time stones, and he goes further back in time to 1945, but then he is all of a sudden back in to 2024, I think is when this movie takes place.
It has to be something like that.
23, 24. And so what happens with that timeline is he riding parallel for a while with Peggy, because I think Peggy gets married in the original timeline.
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you, I think that's Cap.
Okay, because we never find out. Right?
I firmly believe that's Cap.
Yeah, because I've been seeing that online. Like, well, was Cap at the funeral of Peggy while like her husband would be there? Wouldn't he? So like, there's been like, are they both there?
Or he knows he can't go because he knows he's been there. Like that thing of living those two lives is really interesting. But I firmly believe that's what it is.
But the timeline structure in this film is really, really interesting because it breaks kind of the rules of the traditional what is time travel in cinema. And I think most of the time it is your past changes your future. I mean, Ant-Man set up the was so Back to the Future is a little BS. Like, well, yeah, it kind of is in this movie. It doesn't make any sense, but like, it's way more compelling in Back to the Future, in Terminator, for you to don't bump into your parents, don't bump into yourself. Well, there's another one there as well. I don't remember what it was, but it's way more interesting for those movies. But because we have a superhero aspect to this film, like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and we get that wonderful Nebula moment where Nebula is linked on the same network, and so the information shared, and it's such a great twist that no one would have, like, that's one I give them that would not have been considered, and it does really create the idea of the problems of time travel without it becoming this wonky disaster area that we have to go back and fix.
Right.
And I thought that was great. I enjoyed that immensely, and I thought as a plot device, it allowed us to see Nebula's character development, like the secondary character in so many ways, who's come to the forefront. And you know, you have Karen Gillian playing it, who's like great, amazing, like another great actress, who both can do the pain and then is able to talk to both the broken sister, still damaged, and start to heal her and to herself and murder her old self. Like, that's such a powerful moment. And again, one of those things that when I watch these movies, right, I'm finding messages that I can live by. It's not enough to have fun for me. It's not enough to enjoy the ride.
You need to have a connection on how to live. Right?
Knowing that I can kill my old self and be my new self is a strong existentialist idea. It's just a strong idea. Sure. I don't have to be defined. I can be by my actions, by who I do. It's so good.
I mean, this whole movie's littered with that. Littered with the self-sacrifice of her killing her old self, of letting the past die, of moving on, and not just moving on to have a life, but and getting over the past, but moving on to become better people in general. I think that the character choice to have Nebula connect with old Nebula, we don't really see. I feel like I had a hard time seeing her character arc because she is so robotic,
right?
And almost even grumpy when she's a good person, like a hero, right? She's still grumpy playing football with Tony, and it doesn't seem like she's changed. But when you go back and you put them next to each other, you can see a clear, distinct, wow, she's actually come a really, really long way. And for them to do that was, I think, a good choice, because I didn't feel like I really connected with her all that much until that moment.
And for this idea that Stan Lee has, that everyone can be the hero, that idea that you can move from the most heinous position.
Right.
Like you're the person who creates the problem we live at the end.
Yeah.
And flip it to, no, I'm not that.
Right.
I have changed, and I have a different mission now, and that mission's about being a better person is really powerful to me.
Yeah.
So there's one other thing I want to definitively talk about, and I mentioned it earlier with splash pages. It's about the last battle.
Yeah.
As a comic book fan, one of the things this movie felt like what we would call an annual in the comics, right?
Okay.
So now they do these big sort of interweaved, multi-plotted stories where for a year you have to read every comic that's being produced to weave through the story that comes to a conclusion based in a long-term comic.
Yeah.
But in the old days, there would be an annual, a bonus episode every year, and that annual would also be some gigantic monster battle, right? And you flip open and there's that splash page. Sometimes the first page, often the center spread, wherever, where it's this full-blown moment.
Right.
And that moment for me in this film is when the camera moves, and it's one of those moments where so often in these movies, and you know, Whedon's the worst of them in some ways. The camera's moving because it needs to move.
Right.
So like we're with the Avengers and they're making a plan, so the camera has to track around the table, right? We're doing dolly shots every time we can.
Yeah.
We're pushing in all the time. It doesn't have meaning often. It's just present, right?
Right.
But in that moment when we see the pullback, like what meant to establishing shot with all the open sort of circles that the wizards are creating, and we see the battle about to begin, and we pull way back, and the camera just moves. In film, you get a splash page that has to be bigger than it is, and it had to move because the world was bigger than the camera
the
could
field
take
of view
in. Right?
was not big enough for what we were seeing.
And in a comic, it's the page, right? It's like this. There's a page, and we're blocked by the edges. But in film, you can shift and you can say it's bigger than the page. And I just thought that was beautiful.
Yeah.
And we had splash page moment after splash page moment. Then
the whole battle was there was moments where I think the biggest shot for me that gave me like, whoa, this looks incredible is they pull out and it's a super wide of Cap in the light, silhouetted by the light behind him, walking towards Thanos, who's in the darkness on the right side of the screen, and that pullback was mind blowing. I mean, I felt the same way going back to The Last Jedi. There was that same moment for me of this super wide. You have light on one side, darkness on the other, and it was like it was ripped out of a comic book in Endgame. Like that, I was like, that is a panel. That is a panel in the comics.
And that happened over and over. It happened with Captain Marvel and Thanos. There's this great moment. She's up high and coming down. And we saw these moment after moment of these big, beautiful action moments that freeze as panels but are living in action. And as a filmmaker, that's really the way they need to find the balance.
Right.
So when we look at like Guardians 2, the opening sequence of Guardians 2, which is brilliant, right?
Yeah.
That opening sequence is not full of splash pages. It's full of individual, intimate moments, right? Guns like pulling us into people's lives. Here we were looking at these big panels, these beautifully drawn moments, and they are drawn in digitally to some great extent. I also want to say about that end sequence is that the handoff was done very creatively.
Yeah.
We're losing these heroes we care about, right? And they're being replaced by other characters who each get a lovely moment in the sun.
Yeah, so they were all new characters who are taking the mantle, right? You're starting with Hawkeye passing to T'Challa, to Spider-Man, to Valkyrie with an assist on that, and then finally to Captain Marvel taking it all the way to the end, and instead of succeeding, they pass it back to the OG, to Tony, and he kind of takes over from there, right, and finishes his story. But yeah, I love that.
And each of them are successful, right? As much as people are dropping stuff and whatever, they're successful. And we see characters who we care about in the background, whatever may be happening. But we also learn that, like, T'Challa's going to take us someplace now in Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
That's a journey we're going to take. Spider-Man's going to take us someplace. That's a journey we're taking. And being able to do that, and I mean, Spider-Man is joyous, and so in the darkness of that moment, letting the adorable kid run the gauntlet, being helped by people all along, is again almost like what happens with Groot in the second Guardians, where
he's being raised by parents, just superhero parents.
Yeah, superhero parents, right? And I thought that was really absolutely beautiful. And my wife struggled with some of those moments. The action was a lot for her. She struggled with some of the being able to follow what was there, and she thought maybe it went on too long. But I don't think that happens.
Yeah,
I think that they do a tremendous job at getting through it.
Yeah. No, I loved it, and this is a film that's hard to talk about, I think, from a filmmaking perspective, because the story is so massive that you can't help but talk about story. But I think we did a decent job of talking about the story from a filmmaking perspective, I think, because you can talk about plot with it just being plot, but I think we dove a little bit into why they made those choices, seeded a little bit along the way, and more so character development. This movie is really a giant character piece. There's really not a whole lot of action until the last act. It is a big,
extraordinarily long
heads.
battle, but it is.
Yeah, but I loved it because you got to see the characters a little bit more in a movie that. Timer's up, but we have about 30 seconds. In a movie that you wouldn't expect it to be very character driven, because it's the culmination of 21 films. This is a very character driven movie. Up until the last act. We've already gotten to know everybody throughout the last 20 movies, the last 10 years, but there's still character work that needed to be done in response to the snapocalypse, right, that Thanos causes. So I don't know. Give me your rating for for the film.
So I'm gonna let this movie continue to land as a film, as a film made in like an 8 range, right? I think it's a great film. Like, I think it's a really, really good film. It is a comic book film that does not live on its own as well as it could. But as a comic book movie, it rates for me with Logan and with Dark Knight. It is the greatest comic book movie we probably have.
Yeah.
The other two may be better superhero movies.
Right.
This is the greatest comic book movie. And I also think this movie probably, from a filmmaking perspective, the scope of it deserves that weight. In the way I look at Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. It's an epic.
It's so big. Yeah. We need to acknowledge that. How about you?
Yeah. I mean, it's very hard for me to rate this. Again, we break it down into... it's a movie I enjoyed 100%. I think I could not stop thinking about it for the last 2 days, up until the point where I was like, yeah, I absolutely need to see this again, especially in theaters. So I would probably sit around the 8, the 9 as far as a movie experience goes.
Right.
It's a 10 as far as experience goes.
Yeah.
As far as a movie goes, it's an 8 or 9 for me. So emotionally, I loved it. I was much more, we talked about this a little bit, I was much more emotional the second time watching it.
Really?
Much more emotional.
That's interesting.
Because I think I knew what was coming. And so I'm seeing the lead up to all of the payoff.
And so the emotion builds.
And so the emotion is building.
That's the argument for spoilers. Like, that's the argument for spoilers.
Yeah,
so
yeah, exactly. But I think that this is definitely the movie you need to see twice. If you're going to go to the theater and see it, just see it twice, because it's that big of a movie. Like you said, it is an epic. It's on the scale of Ben-Hur, and bigger, obviously, as I think of epics as being Ben-Hur and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, right.
Star Wars is an epic by all means, and it's definitely up there. So as far as superhero goes, 10 out of 10. Movie goes 8 and 9 out of 10. I loved it a lot.
That's
I
great.
really did love it.
Yeah, my plan is to go back. I sort of didn't deliberately, so we'd have this discontinuity between the two of us. There's other things to talk about. There's the hero's journey. There's all those kind of things we're still to talk about. But we're out of time, so we're going to stop for this episode, I think. You agree?
Yeah, well, I think we're done.
We're just to sort of wrap us up for our conversation right now. And it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, you too. It's been a fun movie.
So great. So next one we're going to see is...
Is John Wick 3?
I think it's John Wick 3. So we'll be back for John Wick 3. If we're back for something before that, well, we were wrong. This is the first episode. You have to be forgiving.
Thank you guys so much for watching the very first episode of Racking Focus Podcast. We would love for you guys to support us on Patreon. There's going to be some bonus content and some cool things coming to Patreon pretty soon. If you want to support us, head to the Patreon. I think we'll link it below in the description of the podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, the link will be in the description below as well.
And if you want to follow us just as two guys running around the world, you can follow us on Twitter at PodFocus, or on Instagram at Racking Focus Podcast, or at Facebook at Racking Focus Podcast for you old folks like me. And there you can participate in very specific discussions about each of the films that we're working with.
You can follow us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever podcasts are available, and as well as YouTube. We are very visual people, and we wanted to record this visually for you to watch. If you want to watch us react to each other, saying weird things about the movies we just watched, you can do that. Please like, comment, subscribe wherever you are watching. We want to know what your thoughts are about this podcast.
And we can't tell you how important it is for you to subscribe. It helps us get noticed. It helps us build the reputation we want to have in the followership, so we can sort of share these conversations with you folks and with each other. And that also means leave a review. And for right now, if you could just be graceful and gentle, just like pop a 5-star review down. You can give us really instructive comments on how we can do better underneath. We'd love to hear that. You want to complain to us, fine. But if you can give us 5 stars for now, that'd be great. Later on, if you want to re-review and pull down that rating once you've sort of established ourselves, we're happy with that. We can just use your support. So if you love us with 5 stars for right now. If you hate us, you can hate us with 5 stars for right now. We would love either to be the case.
We want to know what movies you want us to review, and more importantly, we want you guys to be in on the conversation. So tweet at us, DM us, message us on Facebook with your thoughts about each movie. Between the recording segments, we're going to send out a blast on social media asking questions about what did you think of the movie. We want you guys to reply and be in on the conversation. This is not just a podcast between the two of us, but it's a group discussion between us and the internet and the people who have enjoyed or hated the film as much as we did.
And we're super excited about the idea of being able to actually include those comments while we're talking. Other voices here in the room with us that we could both comment with or against. And if you want to do that privately and you don't want to post it in one of the social media formats, we're at rackingfocuspod@gmail.com. You can send us an email and we can sort of begin that process more privately there.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Josiah Blizzard.
I'm John Doyle.
And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Racking Focus Podcast.